king of German mercenaries.
Chapter 201 Early Autumn Harvest. After returning to Denberg, Marin not only arranged for Kohler to go to Venice to withdraw money to buy things, but also bought a batch of second-hand Kirk sailboats. The main reason was that Marin couldn't wait for the newly built ships. Because Marin decided to launch an attack on East Frisia after the autumn harvest. Kohler had already taken 2 warships to Venice, so Marin was left with 2 fewer large ships. Therefore, Marin had no choice but to send people to Britain and Denmark to buy several second-hand large ships of more than 100 tons. These boats were mainly used to carry war horses. Unlike people can ride on ordinary small boats. But horses are different. Horses are huge and heavy. Ordinary small boats cannot carry horses. Some small boats can easily capsize if war horses move a little on them. For the attack on Texel Island, Marin planned to land with 400 horses. Although horses were not needed to attack Emden, in order to prevent the news from leaking out, Marin decided to land with 400 cavalry, mainly to kill messengers and delay the time for the news to leak out. Although, among these 400 horses, only a few dozen are real war horses, and the rest are draft horses. But those draft horses are the second best horses after war horses of the French breed, and they can barely be used as war horses, anyway, they are not used to charge into battle. The horses that ordinary messengers ride are not better than these horses. Therefore, using these horses to intercept the messenger is enough. You know, there is no shortage of people who take advantage of troubled waters in this world. For example, last time Marin crippled the Frisian noble republic, the Duke of Saxony got the news, and then the Frisian region was plucked. This time, Marin did not want to be taken advantage of. Therefore, he planned to quickly send troops to control the border of East Frisia after taking Emden to prevent others from taking the land. Especially in the west, that was the territory of the Duke of Saxony. If the old man saw Marin taking action, he might send troops to grab the food. Of course, it was said that the 9 Frisian nobles had already begun planning to cause trouble for the Duke of Saxony. For this reason, Marin thought about it and sent a letter to the 9 people, suggesting that they send troops to rob food during the autumn harvest. In the agricultural era, food was an extremely important material and wealth. In fact, food was the foundation of a country. Anyone who robbed other countries of their food was equivalent to shaking the foundation of other countries. When the autumn harvest comes, these 9 guys will lead people to the southern part of Frisia to rob food, which will inevitably attract the attention of the local Saxon garrison. If they harass them during normal times, the garrisons may not pay attention. However, when they came to rob food during the autumn harvest, the Saxon garrison had to come out to stop them. Otherwise, if there was not enough food, it would affect social stability. Once the main force of the Saxon garrison left Groningen, which was very close to East Frisia, Marin could attack East Frisia with confidence. As for whether those 9 fools would follow his plan, Marin was sure. Because those 9 Frisian nobles didn't have much money. And they had to feed hundreds of soldiers and even planned to expand the army. Therefore, going to southern Frisia to grab food during the autumn harvest season was the best choice. At this time, the grain was still in the fields and had not been sent to the fortified cities, so it was very easy to rob. With the grain, the 9 guys would be able to feed their troops and have the opportunity to expand their army. The autumn harvest season was their best opportunity to rob grain. On Marin's side, he also began to make intensive arrangements for the autumn harvest. In this era, the grain varieties in Europe seemed to be not good. Whether it was wheat, rye, or barley, it seemed that the growth cycle was very long. For example, wheat is usually planted in November of the first year, and then harvested in July or August of the following year. This is true, not made up by the author. The growth cycle is as long as 8 or 9 months. Marin knew that the growth cycle of winter wheat was indeed longer because it grew extremely slowly in winter. But he remembered that the wheat in his hometown in his previous life was usually harvested in May, which was more than 2 months earlier than the wheat in medieval Europe. The same goes for rye and spring wheat. In Marin's hometown in the previous life, spring wheat was planted in March and April and harvested in July. However, the rye varieties in Europe in this era are also planted in March and April, but not harvested until October. Such a long growth cycle made it almost impossible for European crops to grow twice a year. Even in southern Europe, which was the most suitable region for growing twice a year, crops could only grow once a year due to crop variety. However, Marin knew that the use of potash and phosphate fertilizers could promote crop growth and flowering and fruiting. Therefore, crops in the Wadden Islands, which were fertilized with potash and phosphate fertilizers, might be harvested earlier than in other areas. Sure enough, after mid-September, the rye and oats in the Wadden Islands began to mature, while in other parts of Europe, the rye was still green. Marin planned to launch an attack on East Frisia after the autumn harvest, but if the autumn harvest on his side ended early and the autumn harvest in East Frisia ended late, then he would have a great advantage. Because, during the autumn harvest season, the young and strong people in most countries will disperse to their respective farmlands to harvest wheat, rather than gathering in cities. Therefore, during the autumn harvest season, even if the Count of East Frisia was attacked and successfully sent out a message, it would be difficult for him to gather enough reinforcements in a short time. Because the able-bodied men were scattered in the farmland in the countryside, how could they be gathered so quickly? By the time the able-bodied men were gathered, the daylilies would have already gone cold. Therefore, Marin decided to harvest the rye and oats in the Wadden Islands as quickly as possible. Then, while the East Frisians were still busy working in the fields, he would quickly send troops to attack them by surprise. In order to harvest the crops in the fields as soon as possible, Marin ordered 6,000 soldiers to go to the fields to help harvest the wheat. Except for the apprentice knights who were born in the master's family, all the other soldiers were from farmers' families. Because, in this era, the urban population was very small. And the soldiers recruited by Marin were basically from farmers' families. Therefore, harvesting wheat was very familiar to these soldiers. With the help of 6,000 soldiers, the speed of harvesting wheat fields on the island was greatly accelerated. Then, in October, when other areas had just started autumn harvest, all the wheat fields on the Wadden Islands were harvested. In addition, all the rye and oats were dried and stored in the granary. Finally, when the statistics were tallied, everyone was shocked. It turned out that after using enough potash and phosphate fertilizers, plus the original nitrogen-containing manure, the average yield of rye per moo in the Wadden Islands reached a huge 450 pounds. This is because many grain fields in the Wadden Islands are newly reclaimed and the land is not fertile enough. You know, the cultivated land on Texel Island has an acreage yield of 600 pounds. The newly reclaimed land only has an acreage yield of about 400 pounds. But even so, 400 pounds of acreage yield is enough to be the best in this era. Here, raw land and cultivated land are informal terms used in the countryside. Generally, land that has been cultivated for many years has more decomposed materials and is easy to produce high yields. However, the soil of newly cultivated raw land may not be fertile, and even if fertilizer is applied, it will not be as high-yielding as cultivated land. It does not mean that any place will produce high yields as soon as it is cultivated. Some overly poor soils may need to be improved for several years or even more than 10 years before they can become fertile soil suitable for farming. Generally speaking, the more decomposed materials there are, the more fertile the land is. When the fertility reaches a certain level, it becomes black soil, but Marin knew that this was because the grain varieties of this era were not good. If the varieties were good and there was enough fertilizer, the yield per moo could reach thousands of kilograms. Of course, Marin didn't study agriculture, so he didn't know how to breed high-quality varieties. Moreover, for the times, a yield of 400 pounds per acre was already very scary, and there was no need to go higher. In order not to scare others, Marin ordered strict confidentiality of the grain production data on the Wadden Islands and prohibited the disclosure. As for the 27 new apprentice knights, Buckman went to Cork. Marin did not let them participate in the autumn harvest, but paid them to go out for a walk. Therefore, they did not know the grain production on the island. Because these people have not returned yet, they are not his own people, how could Marin tell them the secret? And among the 6,000 soldiers, although many of them may leave in the future, these soldiers were not present when the statistics were counted. Therefore, the soldiers can only feel that the Wadden Islands have a bumper harvest this time. But these illiterate people obviously have no intuitive understanding of the specific extent of the harvest. You know, even if it is within 100, these illiterate soldiers have to use their fingers for a long time to ask them to estimate the yield per moo, which is too difficult for them. Moreover, as soon as the autumn harvest was over, Marin immediately ordered the troops to assemble for the final exercise, a nighttime beach landing. The soldiers were already very skilled at beach landings, but they were still not used to the final nighttime beach landings. After all, most people were not used to nighttime landings. Moreover, Marin had forbidden them to use torches. However, probably because they ate a lot of fish, none of Marin's 6,000 men had night blindness, which was very convenient for night battles. Marin thought about it and thought that it was probably because the poor people in ancient China ate rice and wheat and lacked vitamin. Europeans ate more meat and fish and drank milk, so they naturally did not have these problems. Marin recalled the 27 trainee knights who were traveling in Amsterdam, and carried out the final training with everyone. It won't be long before they can launch an attack on Emden. Even Saul and his reconnaissance troops have been sent to East Frisia in advance. Their mission is to monitor the Earl of East Frisia and his family to prevent them from leaving and causing Marin's army to be empty-handed. In addition, he also has to monitor the garrison in Groningen. Once they leave Groningen to go south to hunt down the rebels of the Frisian nobles, Marin's chance to take action will come. Chapter 202, Dispatching Troops. After Marin's secret letter was delivered, the 9 former Frisian nobles strongly agreed with Marin's suggestion to launch an attack during the autumn harvest, because they were indeed short of money and food. Moreover, although Europe was backward at that time, the city walls were all made of stone, tall and strong. With the hundreds of people in the hands of these nobles, ordinary cities could not be conquered. According to the habits of the nobles at that time, most of the property and money were hidden in the city and difficult to obtain. But the autumn harvest season is different, because the crops grow in the fields and there are no walls around them. Even if the army wants to protect them, it has to know the enemy's time and route of action. If we launch a surprise attack and grab some food, it won't be too easy. Without the city walls blocking them, a few hundred soldiers could grab a lot of food. Therefore, several Frisian nobles were tempted. After the autumn harvest began in Friesland in October, 670 Frisian soldiers exiled in the Duchy of Geddes began to gather secretly. Charles II, Duke of Geddes, was surprised, but after learning about the plan of the 9 nobles, he was very impressed because this was the best opportunity to strike the Duke of Saxony. Moreover, these 9 fools had robbed enough money and food, which could also reduce his financial burden. As for Marin, he was also waiting for news from Frisia. As long as the attack from Frisia was launched and the main force of the Saxon army in Groningen was attracted to encircle and suppress, Marin would immediately launch an attack on East Frisia. When some villages in the southwest of West Frisia began to harvest rye and spread the grains on the threshing floor, 9 Frisian nobles could no longer hold back. Thus, 670 Frisian veterans, with 120 knights as the vanguard, left the border of the Principality of Geddes, passed the border between Geddes and the Archbishopric of Utrecht, and entered the territory of West Frisia, far away from Groningen. The local people were still spreading their rye grains on the ground to dry. Suddenly, the former Frisian army broke in. Each of these soldiers carried a bag. After rushing into the village, they first sent people to guard the main road, and then went directly to the threshing floor to fill their bags with rye. Then, the gang rushed into the village and began to rob the residents' homes. After that, they took away the farmers' livestock and put them on the wagons to transport the stolen rye and property. Over the course of several days, the Frisian army looted more than a dozen villages, taking away tens of thousands of bags of rye. A bag of rye weighed about 100 pounds, leaving nothing for the local residents. When Marin heard the news, he was really worried about the IQ of these idiots. Nimad, these people were your people in the past. If you want to restore your rule over Frisia, don't you need the support of these people? You are doing this so ruthlessly, almost forcing the people to death. Moreover, in this era, few lords have the habit of releasing grain to help refugees. Therefore, those people who were robbed are in big trouble. God knows how many people will starve to death. Thinking of this, Marin suddenly decided to get some people to East Frisia. Because he was about to take over East Frisia, and the population of East Frisia was far smaller than that of West Frisia. It just so happened that these idiots who created the disaster could be taken to East Frisia to help him work and farm. Upon receiving the news from the southwest of West Frisia, George, the eldest son of the Duke of Saxony stationed in Groningen, did not dare to neglect and immediately sent people to investigate. At this time, the number of Frisian rebels had reached 2,000. Of course, all the new recruits were captured, and none of them volunteered. Because the idiots did not give the people any chance to live, which made the people very disgusted with them. Therefore, when several former Frisian nobles began to recruit soldiers, no one responded. In desperation, they had to forcibly capture those strong serfs and fill them into the team, bringing the total number of the team to 2,000. A force of 2,000 people was indeed huge. You know, in the former Republic of Frisia, only the 5,000 Saxon main forces in Groningen could compete with it. Even in Leeuwarden, the second largest city in Friesland, there were only 800 Saxon soldiers stationed there. As for other small towns, they simply did not have the courage and strength to fight against this team. In fact, this army only had some combat effectiveness, including the 670 veterans. The newly recruited 1,200 serfs had basically no combat effectiveness. However, with so many people there, it was indeed quite intimidating. George didn't know that most of the 2,000 rebels were new recruits with no fighting power, and thought they were all elite soldiers. So he hurriedly led 4,000 soldiers out of the city and headed west to quell the rebellion. In Groningen, he only left 1,000 soldiers for protection. As soon as George's army left Groningen, a reconnaissance team under Saul immediately sent 2 riders to report the news in different directions. One of them went straight to Harlingen, then changed ships and went straight to Texel Island to report to Marin. The other group went to inform the nobles of the Frisian resistance. The advice Marin gave them was very clever, which he learned from a great man in later generations: when the enemy advances, I retreat, and when the enemy retreats, I come back and continue to rob. In short, try to avoid a head-on confrontation with the main force of the Saxon army. When the Saxon army comes, hide. Wait until they leave, then continue to rob. This would put George's Saxon army in a dilemma. When their army arrived, these Frisians would flee. If George withdrew his army, they would reappear in the Frisian region and continue to rob and kidnap people, putting George in a dilemma. At the same time, the autumn harvest in East Frisia was already halfway through and was in full swing. However, the arable land in East Frisia was very unevenly distributed. Because the farmland in East Frisia is mainly distributed in the southern county of Leer. The entire Leer county is mostly cultivated land. Unlike other areas, some are cultivated land and some are grassland. In addition, there are many swamps. According to the reconnaissance report led by Sauer, nearly one-third of East Frisia is swampland. Moreover, these swamps are mainly distributed in the western and northern coastal areas of East Frisia. Coincidentally, the landing site determined this time, the small fishing village of Crumhorn, was also surrounded by swamps. And there was only one main road leading to Emden. The surrounding areas are all swamps, so naturally there are few people. In this way, when Marin's army lands, it will not be easy to be discovered. At that time, it is only necessary to send a small number of people to watch over the residents of the small fishing village and prevent them from sending people to Emden to report the news. After receiving Saul's reconnaissance report, Marin was overjoyed. He was most worried that the main force of the Saxon army, which might cause trouble, had left, and nothing could hinder his conquest of East Frisia. Therefore, he immediately organized troops, horses, and supplies, and officially marched to East Frisia. Chapter 203, into the city on October 21, 1498, when the autumn harvest in Europe was in full swing, Marin led his army and first arrived at the easternmost island of Skirmanikug. This place is very close to East Frisia, but even so, the distance from the pier on the east side of Skirmanikug to Crumhorn is nearly 50 kilometers. In that era, the speed of sailboats was very low, generally only a maximum of 7 or 8 knots, or about 13 or 14 kilometers per hour, and this was with a tailwind. Fortunately, the Wadden Sea is in the prevailing westerly wind belt. Therefore, Marin's fleet had a smooth journey to Crumhorn. In the evening, Marin's army had reboarded the ship and then set sail. Marin used the legendary rope speed measurement method and found that the speed was as high as 7 knots, which is close to 13 kilometers per hour. So, after nearly 4 hours, the fleet approached Crumhorn. At this time, there was only a faint moonlight in the sky. Because the moon was only a crescent that day, the moonlight was very faint and weak. Moreover, it seemed that the sun would set in the second half of the night. Marin looked at the pocket watch, which was about the same size as an alarm clock, and found that it was already 11 o'clock in the middle of the night. At this time, on the shore, Marin saw someone waving 3 torches. That was the signal agreed upon by Saul and Marin. This showed that Saul and his men had already controlled the small fishing village of Crumhorn. Because they were afraid that someone would leave the fishing village and report to Emden, Marin had already arranged for Saul to sneak into East Frisia with his reconnaissance troops. On the evening of the appointment, Marin asked Saul's scouts to control the 2 roads leading to the outside world from Crumhorn. After completing the control, they waited at the beach. Saul secretly controlled the road outside the village after 9 o'clock in the evening and knocked out the night watchman arranged by the fishing village. Then, he asked 30 men to monitor the village, while he, holding a telescope, kept looking at the sea. Finally, around 11 o'clock in the middle of the night, Saul saw the shadows of groups of ships on the sea. Obviously, this was Marin's fleet. Because other fleets could not have so many ships. Moreover, in this era, no one likes to sail in the middle of the night. Even if sailing in the middle of the night, the ship is brightly lit, unlike Marin's fleet, which deliberately did not light up the lights and only relied on the faint moonlight to move forward. Fortunately, Marin arranged for several captains to secretly walk this route many times in advance. Therefore, even with only the help of the faint moonlight, they can successfully avoid the sandbar and arrive safely. As for the captains who have not taken this route, they can just command the ships to follow. After approaching Crumhorn, under the command of Marin, several large ships loaded with horses and armor approached the 2 long bridge docks that had been repaired in advance. Other ships approached the shore directly to arrange a beach landing. As for whether the ship might run aground, Marin didn't care. Even if it ran aground, it didn't matter, because after the ship sent the personnel ashore, it basically completed its mission. Moreover, these fishing boats carrying people are not big, usually no more than 100 tons. After the war, send people to push the stranded boats into the water. As expected, dozens of fishing boats were unfortunately stranded. But the stranded boats were convenient for the soldiers who were landing on the beach, because as soon as they got off the boat, they stepped on the beach. Because they had been training for a long time, they rolled up their trouser legs very skillfully, stepped on the sand, and ran to the shore. After about 2 hours of hard work, everyone finally assembled. Then, the horses and armor were basically unloaded from the dock, and everyone began to collect their own armor according to the numbers on the armor. After putting on the armor, Marin gave an order, and the 6,000-man army quickly marched along the road, led by Saul's scouts, towards Emden city. Because it was a forced march, the vanguard troops arrived at the city of Emden after more than 2 hours, covering a distance of 15 kilometers. Among them, the 100 veterans of the first phalanx, whom Marin trusted the most, arrived at a small courtyard in the northeast of Emden and began to enter the city through the tunnel. After a while, Marin's army gradually approached Emden city. Orders: the first phalanx will attack the east gate of Emden, with 700 Frisian warriors as the vanguard. The second phalanx will block the north gate to prevent the enemy from escaping, and wait for an opportunity to attack the city. The third phalanx will block the west gate to prevent the enemy from escaping, and also wait for an opportunity to attack the city. As for the fourth phalanx, go to the south of the city to seize the port to prevent any ships from escaping. Yes, I understand. Okay, the troops that will seize the dock will set off first. We must not let any ship go. Yes. The first formation, follow me and wait outside the east gate. Marin ordered. Main force of the second phalanx, follow me to the north gate. Schwartz ordered. Third formation, follow me to the west gate. Franzberg ordered. Fourth phalanx, follow me. Stade, an apprentice knight from the state of Mark, who was temporarily appointed by Marin as the acting leader of the fourth phalanx, led the fourth phalanx and quickly went south to control the port of Emden. After arriving at their respective positions, the commanders of the first, second and third phalanxes did not call for an attack, but waited for the south direction of the city. At this time, there was no moonlight in the sky, and the morning light had not yet arrived. Once the fourth phalanx succeeded, they would light a fire in the direction of the dock to show that they had succeeded. More than an hour later, a fire was lit in the direction of the dock, and the signal for the general attack was finally launched. The 100 vanguards in the city also put on full sets of plate armor and picked up two-handed swords. These 100 people were selected from the 400 who followed Marin at first. They all had good physiques. Wearing full body armor, they had no problem fighting in a short period of time. Moreover, the leader was none other than Marin's trusted general brother, Khan. Moreover, Marin did not want to expose the tunnel to other fighters because he was afraid that others would learn this trick and use it against him. Therefore, only a small number of Marin's confidants knew about the existence of the tunnel. Even the Lanxiang excavation team was a person that Marin trusted. After seeing the flames rising from the south of the city, 100 soldiers, led by Khan, launched an attack on the east gate. Khan wielded his mace and quickly knocked away several guards coming out from the city gate. Then, he led his men into the city gate. Because the people of Emden had no idea that they would be attacked tonight, there were no stones, tree stumps or other things piled up in the city gate to block it. So, after defeating a dozen guards guarding the city gate, Khan successfully rushed to the back of the city gate, then took out a hammer and violently smashed open the copper lock on the inside of the city gate. Afterwards, with a series of creaking sounds, the east city gate was opened by Khan and his companions. Most of the soldiers outside the city were a little stunned. Originally, they thought it was a violent attack and were ready to climb the city wall. But they didn't see Marin prepare any ladders or bring any artillery for siege. Just when they were puzzled, they saw that the east gate was opened. Then, they suddenly realized that Lord Marin had already prepared an insider. At Marin's command, 700 Frisian warriors, led by 200 heavily armored swordsmen, entered the city gate first and walked onto the street leading to Emden Palace. At this time, the garrison in the city finally reacted: someone is attacking the city. Someone is attacking the city. The east gate has been forced. The east gate has been forced. When such a cry sounded, the people who were originally sleeping in the city were finally awakened. At the same time, the sky had begun to gradually brighten, with a hazy color. However, before entering the city, Marin ordered Saul, take 400 cavalrymen and block all the important roads. If anyone comes, detain them and never allow them to take the news away. Also, send someone to the south of the city to notify Stade and have the soldiers change out of their military uniforms and pretend to be sailors, and go around the docks, but they must carry swords. If there are any foreign merchant ships docking during the day, detain them quietly to prevent them from taking the news away. Yes, sir. Saul led his men away in a hurry. Then, Marin gave another order, everyone listen up, after entering the city, try not to set fire. The reason for this is that Marin is afraid that the billowing smoke rising from the city will be seen by the crew on the EMS river. With thick smoke in the city, smart people will definitely think that there is a battle in the city, which will easily leak the news. After giving this order, Malin rode his horse and led the first phalanx into the city.